Welcome. This is Sidebar. Sidebar, a frank discussion on the law, life, and liberty. Sponsored by the LaHood Norton Law Group. And now, your objection sustained. Your hosts, Karen Klaus and former Bexar County District Attorney, Nico LaHood.
1200 WOAI, this is Sidebar with former Bexar County DA Nico LaHood, trial lawyer, managing partner of LaHood Norton Law Group, and George Araujo, scholar, former chemist, pharmaceutical researcher, and director. Please join us during the show and after the show every Saturday by going to sidebartv.com, and that's where you can watch us live on the platform of your choice. There are a couple of things going on that I know that we really have to touch on. And one is with my children being college students, with your children being college students, I am hyper aware of these pro-Palestinian protests that are continuing on major U.S. campuses, universities, and as close as the University of Texas. This is something that I ask myself, like other protests in the past, are these people being brought in, or are these really students from the universities? And wow, UT Austin, did you see some of the video on that? That was crazy. And then in another story that I hope we get to talk about, and that is President Donald Trump. Jurors have a 3-day weekend to think about what they heard this week, but there's so many questions that remain because the more and more I listen to it, and I try to listen to it with a fair ear, it appears that these cases against Donald Trump are falling apart. Is that true? Am I feeling too optimistic?
Well, I don't know if they're falling apart. I have not listened to any of the testimony on that. It was a crazy week, and the SCOTUS arguments kind of got my attention with little attention I had left to give. But I think going into the trial, I don't think there's been legal experts on either side that think that these are great cases against President Trump. So how the evidence is playing out, it sounds like from reports and little snippets I've heard here and there that it's playing out that way, and actually it is essentially, from other people's opinion, falling apart. But going into it, I think they went into the tunnel bad in the first place. They didn't have a light in the tunnel anyway, so when you don't have a light in the tunnel, it's easy to hit the walls. And so it sounds like that's what's happening from what I understand. Again, I like to make a distinction when I've heard something and I can give you my direct opinion versus other people's opinion. But that's not surprising to me. From these cases and the way they had to play legal twister and gymnastics to get them in play, it really was an issue in and of itself. So even if if there's likely of a conviction, I think the likelihood of upholding that conviction is going to be low when you're looking at the legal insufficiencies and the factual insufficiencies of these cases.
Yeah, that's right. But I'm also, Nico, because of what happened at the United States Supreme Court this past week, it kind of makes what is happening on the ground in these various trials that are dealing with an election interference, I think, a little bit less relevant. And by a little, I mean a lot, because the implications of the ruling from SCOTUS, or at least the anticipated ruling from SCOTUS based on the oral arguments on this notion of immunity and what the hell that means, I think could really, sort of affect the relevance of what's happening in some of these cases that are really questionable. The Georgia case, the Fulton County case, the New York case.
But this one, your case is before he was president, correct?
True, but
yeah, so that would be different.
But except for when do the payments actually happen? They actually happened in 2017. So President Trump would actually have been president then. The waters, you're right, are more murky.
Yeah,
I think they're more murky because it goes back to activities before Trump became president. But that's the weakest of all the cases. The Bragg case is admittedly the most pathetic of cases. So if that's all that Trump is left with, that's a real gift. So I think ultimately, even though I don't know that anything was really solved at the Supreme Court this week, but that's a win for Trump precisely because nothing was solved.
And Can you talk a little bit about that?
I'm sure we're gonna get into that, but I think that's a win. That's a win because if you think about it, no lawyer arguing before the court, Nico, please correct me if I'm wrong, whether it's prosecutor or defense, no lawyer arguing before the court this week.
The Supreme Court.
That's right.
Okay.
convinced anyone that immunity isn't relevant at some level. In other words, Trump won, I think, ultimately, because everyone standing there agreed that the President of the United States enjoys at least some immunity.
But I don't think anybody disagreed with that going into it. I mean, I don't think anybody on either side thought that the president should get no immunity. Now, whether it's absolute versus qualified immunity, I think we need to dissect.
I don't know if that's true. Tanya Chutkan actually says the President of the United States enjoys no immunity.
Who's that? Who?
Tanya Chutkan. She's the judge at the D.C.
Oh, yeah.
Circuit Court.
Oh, I thought you meant on the Supreme Court dais. I'm sorry. I meant some lower court.
But that's the mentality. There's a mentality here that says, and of course they don't actually believe that. They certainly want Biden to enjoy the immunity, presidential immunity. But this is the point that Trump doesn't enjoy immunity. There's this notion of carving out exceptions for Trump, and that was exposed in the oral arguments. That Michael Dreeben, who was arguing on behalf of Jack Smith, you could see this underlying notion that, yeah, I know we have 250 years of presidents enjoying immunity clearly, and even though that's not explicitly stated in the Constitution, that's obviously been the modus operandi. Now, but for Trump, so there's a sort of these carved out exceptions for Trump, and I think the justices called that out. I think that was called out. But at the end of the day, there is immunity. The president does enjoy immunity. And so now we're left to sort of negotiate on the scope of immunity.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think they talked about Obama with the drone strikes. I only heard an hour, but I really wanted to listen to all 2 hours and 47 minutes of the arguments on both sides. And I just couldn't get through it. And there was no way to do it in fast speed, the link that I had. So there was a distinction between absolute and qualified immunity, and then there was a ton of examples. And some of the examples even Justice Jackson, she had some good examples. I mean, she had some good questions, I thought. Sotomayor was I think the fear on that side, I think the fear for everybody is, we're leaving a monarch when we're in the inception of this country, so we don't want to go back to a monarch. So I think it sounds like everybody was making this distinction between official acts and private acts. Absolute immunity versus qualified immunity. That was where the rubber met the road for me, from what I heard. And I don't think they're going to come with a ruling of absolute immunity. I don't think you're saying that either, right?
No, I'm not saying that. But I think de facto that's where we're going to end up, because.
What do you mean? You mean this?
Because ultimately and logically and perhaps even legally, I think this is a conundrum. I think this is an irresolvable ambiguity. Because look, at the high level, like you just said it seems really clear. We need to distinguish between official acts and private acts or personal acts. Yeah. That sounds pretty clear at this level. When you start getting down into minutia, into the weeds, and to your point, there was the example of Obama that Kavanaugh brought up. Obama in 2011 ordered a drone strike that ended up wiping out 3 American citizens. Admittedly, American citizens that to greater or lesser extents were involved with Al-Qaeda operations, terrorism operations. This is Anwar al-Awlaki, I think Abdurrahman al-Awlaki, his son, which was killed two weeks later after his dad in a separate drone strike in Yemen, and in Samir Khan. So the question there was, okay, well, can Obama be prosecuted for crimes? Sure. Kavanaugh wasn't suggesting that he should. I think he was kind of using the reductio ad absurdum argument that basically says, let me find something really absurd to try to test the limits of this official versus private acts test. And I think he opened up a can of worms, and that was his point. So the can of worms is, it's very subjective. How do you determine what's an official act, and how do you determine whether it's a private act?
Well, there was some case law they were referring to, a Brewster's analysis, and they were talking about that. Look, I mean, obviously, official act is signing legislation, granting a pardon. And then I thought it was interesting, the question that was posed towards the end was, so does every president pardon themselves on the way out? And then they said, well, this court has not taken up whether a president can pardon themselves. I go, well, then that's a road we have to cross as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, so it was really, I mean, I enjoyed the hour that I listened to, and I think that I don't think they're going to come back with an absolute immunity, because here's what we don't want. We don't want a monarch in the presidency. We definitely don't. And then you have to think on either side, whether it's someone that doesn't like the conservatives or someone that doesn't like the progressives or whatever it is. Do we want Biden with absolute immunity? Do you want a future Democrat president with absolute immunity? Do you want someone who thinks more communistic that ends up being president by some manner to have absolute immunity? Then we end up with a Russia, or we end up with a Ukraine, or we end up with some other China country.
But I think who brought the remedy the best remedy to the table. I think that Dreeben brought a bunch of internally contradictory arguments, and we can talk about that shortly.
Okay.
But I think the lawyer representing Trump, I think it was Bauer, right? And I like what he had to say. I want to read it because I think this is well said. Quote, "Without presidential immunity from criminal prosecution, there can be no presidency as we know it. If a president can be charged, put on trial, and imprisoned for his most controversial decisions, as soon as he leaves office, that looming threat will distort the president's decision-making precisely when bold and fearless action is most needed." And I think what the arguments exposed is...
What was he talking about, though? I mean, what example was he talking about? I mean, because I thought some of the examples were legitimate. What if the president orders someone to commit murder?
Okay, and he said there is a remedy here.
Okay.
And so he said these are lurid hypotheticals that in the event they would happen anyway, that he would be brought up before Congress. Congress is the remedy through the articles of impeachment. And he says that basically
so impeachment,
a president,
not prosecution.
Correct. So because
some people that's not enough.
That's the I understand.
Yeah.
He says, but traditionally that's been the remedy, and that is the remedy that's set forth in the Constitution.
Yeah.
And so I think the question comes back, Nico, did the founders not envision this? Why did the founders not put in some mechanism for criminal prosecution in the
Well, I
aftermath
think if
of
you
the
talk about the
presidency?
founders, I think the founders never envisioned the president to be more powerful than Congress. I mean, it's Article 2, not Article 1.
No, excellent.
I mean, so
there's a
Congress.
checks and
So I think we've already gone off the reservation by how powerful any presidency has become with executive orders and all this stuff, and we've gotten so far away from the prescription of our founding fathers with all these the growth of the administrative state and everything else.
True.
And Congress, I mean, there's a reason. We always talk about, the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third Amendment, Fourth Amendment in order of importance. Well, Congress is in Article 1, not Article 2. And the president's in Article 2. So theoretically, I think I've heard some scholars
yet
argue.
Congress has acted. Trump was impeached twice, but not convicted in the Senate. According to the lawyer, according to Bauer, he's saying, hey, we've left that reservation. We've addressed this issue. And actually, one of the issues that come up were election interference issues, obstruction of justice, obstruction of proceedings. And Trump was cleared in the sense that he wasn't convicted by the Senate.
Well, there's more to talk about.
We got to take a break, and we will be right back with more on Sidebar.
With reputations as respected high-level prosecutors in Bexar County, the attorneys of LaHood Norton Law Group bring invaluable practical knowledge from the other side of the aisle, using over 70 years of combined experience to strategically advocate clients' rights and pursue the best possible outcome.
I'm Nico LaHood with LaHood Norton Law Group. Have you been arrested or accused of a crime? The LaHood Norton Law Group has the knowledge to defend you regardless of how small or large your case. In Bexar County, anywhere in the state, or even nationwide.
Nico, when you said they were trying to decide if it's absolute or if it's qualified immunity, and there are so many different examples, but it's hard for me to even ever think of absolute immunity.
It is tough, right? I mean, qualified immunity, it was invented by the Warren Court. And it goes back into the 60s. It's not the same Warren Commission, but it's the court that was at that time, and the Chief Justice was involved there too. It usually has immunity with certain exceptions against acts that are clearly established by law or case law. The example is a police officer. If they exercise a lot of discretion, and so they do a valid search incident to arrest versus an inventory search. Well, did they violate something and didn't violate another thing? So, I mean, qualified immunity means you have immunity except for something that has been established by law or case law. So it's qualified. So it enumerates it. Versus absolute immunity is like, you're not going to get prosecuted for anything, or you're not going to be held accountable for anything. And I don't know. I don't take that position. I don't think anybody's above the law, below the law. But I hear, and I'm going to take on. I've really taken on this ignorant interviewer mindset that Saul takes on sometimes when he asks us such good questions. because I'm really taking it all in, and I want to critically think through this, and really call balls and strikes effectively. I mean, I don't think we're arguing that we want any president. Again, not just the president that we want. We have to get ourselves outside of our own tribalistic mindset. Do we want any president to have absolute immunity? I mean, just think about what that means. Absolute. Or do we want some distinction between official versus personal? Then, if there's a distinction between official and personal acts, then we have to give some guideline on what are official and personal acts. I mean, so, murdering somebody because you don't like them, their political opponent, versus killing somebody because you think that they're doing something against the United States with these drone strikes that they brought up with President Obama are
even John Sauer, I don't know why I said Bauer before, even John Sauer's definition of absolute immunity, Nico, is qualified. Because what he said was, if a president has first been impeached by the Senate.
But he made a procedural argument. He didn't make an absolute, because I think he was saying you need to be impeached first and then prosecute.
Well, that's exactly right.
Well, that's procedural.
Yeah, but that's constitutional, because that's the only remedy that we see in the Constitution. The man's trying to stick to the Constitution, and he's basically coming back and saying, it's a question for you. Did the founders truly not see, and I know well, the founders didn't see a lot of things, it seems, but did the founders truly not see a situation where a president could then, because they were familiar with tyranny, they were coming out of a tyrannical
but that just
framework.
seems like a delayed prosecution argument. So you're saying that you want this procedure to happen first, which I'm all for due process. But I think I'm passing all that just for now. I'm saying, okay, let's say we get there, because as if it's not foreseeable that a president can be impeached. I mean, we've seen it, right? Okay, so is that the norm? Because it's going to be a rubber stamp at some point. The impeachment process is going to be just a rubber stamp. Now, once we get that through that rubber stamp, let's talk about absolute immunity. So if he's impeached, does the president have absolute immunity? I guess that's the question.
Well, you're not impeached on a simple majority. So there are, I mean, I understand what you're saying.
But I want to get past that for a second.
The more politicized things get, that could conceivably happen. But there are hurdles that have to be crossed before a president obviously
let's get there. In our hypothetical, let's get there.
That's right. So I think what Sauer is saying, once a president is impeached, then you've actually said there is no absolute immunity, because absolute immunity by definition means under no circumstances can a president be.
He didn't take that position.
He didn't, because he's putting in the caveat of Congress. And so it begs the question, if that isn't the caveat, then what are we left with? Prosecutors? So then is it federal prosecutors? Amy Coney Barrett was, I think, kind of wondering down that.
That's a good question.
So is it just federal prosecutors? Or can you imagine the absolute chaos? And I'm sitting here smirking because it's happening right now as it pertains to Trump, where you have every Tom, Dick, and Harry at the state prosecution level going after a president. Yeah. This is absolute chaos. And so unless we follow John Sauer's logic, I think we're in deep, deep trouble. And I think ultimately that's where we're going to end up.
As someone who's been a state prosecutor, so let's talk about this. Let's say that a president, forget about the party, came to Bexar County when I was a district attorney and committed a crime, violated the penal code of the Texas statutes, and was a private act and not an official act. Would I have the right to prosecute him?
Well, no, I think he's saying, well, I don't know what you mean. You'd have to, listen, I push back and say, what do you mean by private act? What does that mean?
He steals your car, murders your cousin.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if the facts show that it was a personal, private act, then the president doesn't have protection.
Well, I'm with you. Then a state prosecutor can move forward. So it gets down to these prosecutors abusing their discretion and having some guidelines.
A state prosecutor can elevate the issue, but ultimately it won't be that state prosecutor that will be prosecuting the president. It'll be
because that's the checks and balance. See, this is the checks and balance. When I was DA, I'm not gonna have some federal authorities come and tell me what I can and can't do based off state law, and they're not gonna tell me what they can and can't do based off federal law. And so, I mean, these are extreme hypotheticals, right? It's almost like biblical. What if when they gave Jesus examples about marriage and 18 husbands dying and all this other stuff, and can you remarry? So I get all that, but I'm just saying that in my hypothetical, the president would not have absolute immunity if he came in and violated a state law.
And what Sauer is saying is that's ultimately going to get escalated to the congressional level. The president's going to have to be impeached. That's a constitutional requirement. You can't just sort of get rid of the man. He's got to go through an impeachment
Even on a state violation, even though there's not a requirement for an impeachment for a state violation?
Well, I mean, that's an open question.
Okay,
but I mean,
fair
the only remedy that we have right now is through the Constitution, through the impeachment process. He's going to have to clear that hurdle. And so all I'm saying is whatever happens at the state level where it might affect you as a local prosecutor, that fact pattern has to go up to the congressional level, and it has to be washed there. It has to be discussed and argued there. And it may find that this is so absurd, I can't even imagine it, because you're right, it's this kind of lurid hypothetical.
Yeah.
But yeah, it may be found that in fact that it wasn't a private act, right? But I think this is where we are. What the hell is a private act? Trump,
that's the issue.
Trump called Georgia, talked to Brad Raffensperger as the Georgia Secretary of State, and said, "I need you to find me votes." Remember? Mm-hmm. We need to find just enough votes. Now, he wasn't literally saying that you make up votes.
He didn't say create votes.
He said you find votes that are out there but haven't been counted.
Yeah.
Okay, so is that a private act or is that an official act? Because he was talking about himself. Okay, what if he was talking about, as the president of the state, but what if he was talking about another Republican candidate? This isn't a hypothetical. They actually, try to impeach him for this. Remember? They actually, I think, did impeach him for this. So is that a private act? What if he was doing that on behalf of another Republican candidate? Is that a private act? Is that an official act? All I'm saying is I think this is irresolvable. I don't think we're going to have bright lines between official acts and private acts, because ultimately I think it's going to be hopelessly subjective. I don't know how we get around that. And so the court's going to remand this back to the appellate system.
Well, that's a win for Trump.
And it's going to get bogged down there.
That's going to be a win for Trump. I think they punt this, or they're going to do, we'll talk about what I think they may or may not do. It's called an as-applied ruling. And they're going to apply it to specific facts. But here's a point that I think needs to be brought up. I was talking to Patrick briefly about this, and I really defer to Patrick. I wish he'd come onto the show when we have these SCOTUS discussions. He's board certified in criminal law and appellate law, and he's our local genius in our office. We're blessed with him. But Trump relies a lot on the knowledge of others. I think a stark example of that is this Operation Warp Speed and the vaccines and all this stuff and all this.
Yeah.
So and then he takes it on as his own, and then he champions forward. And what is one of his strengths is always is also his weakness, right? Every strength taken to an extreme can be a weakness. And so I think it boils down for me as thinking as a former prosecutor, is what was his mens rea? I always bring up mens rea. Did he actually believe that he was faulty in his thinking or moving forward? And the example is, no, Mr. President, these are not valid legal theories or a valid legal act. Screw it. Do it anyway. That's different than thinking, what, this is legit? These are legitimate? Okay, well, then let's explore these. Go. Let's do this if you're telling me that this is legit. And every person in that position, has to take... they're not a subject matter expert on everything that applies to what affects the presidency. I mean, and so then what do you do there? Is there subordinate immunity now also, or subordinate liability? So everybody that gave him advice, I think we're seeing that in some of these cases, some of these lawyers.
But that's actually Michael Dreben's argument. And I think that got him in a hot water, frankly. Michael Dreben said that basically, if the president of the United States is advised, either by prosecutors in the White House or the White House Attorney General, that if he's under advisement, then he can't be prosecuted because he's taking the advice of counsel, right? So then I think Alito asked a fantastic question. Well, what's to prevent the president from simply getting himself a yes man? What's to prevent the president from getting an 100%. Attorney General that basically does his bidding? Okay, if that's all he's got to do, then check. And that's actually happening.
This out, George. And then does the Attorney General be prosecuted?
Right.
And then is it goodwill? Is it a good faith exception? Because you have this thing called a good faith exception. I'm going to give you. It's not specifically on point, but yes, we acted from law enforcement that does a search that's illegal or outside the scope of their authority, but we had a good faith exception. We believed, we were under the impression. So is there a good faith exception for the AG under Alito's analogy there? To where, okay, I don't want to get, it's almost like the mafia, right, under the RICO statute. Well, I don't want to commit the murder, and I don't want to command the murder, so my capo and my consigliere and my underboss and my whatever are going to order the murder, but I'm giving the wink, wink, nod, nod.
Exactly.
I mean, so does it become a organized crime RICO analysis? I mean, so Alito, I didn't hear him ask that question, but I think that's a valid concern, too.
Well, I mean, it seems kind of weird that the guy that works for you grants you immunity, but the guy that he works for doesn't have immunity.
And then I'm just, man, you got my juices flowing now because I didn't hear that from Alito. Okay, so So now you have the president have a fall guy. So you have the AG, wink, wink, order this for me. Then the AG gets prosecuted, gets subject to liability. But then the president pardons him on the way out. I mean, you see where we play gymnastics here. We need some core principles that we can guide. That we can move forward under this position. Look, the presidency, I think the concern is legit, George. I mean, we don't want this chilling effect of the presidency. Like, oh, I gotta act in the best interest of the United States. But what if I do this? What if Obama didn't order those drone strikes? What if Bush didn't do this? What if, I mean, we can go back and forth and the blame is equally spread across several presidents. But moving forward, I mean, what's going to happen? Do you subject the president to blackmail and to being bullied and to be doing all this stuff and not making a momentary game time decision under counsel, hopefully? And then where does that liability lie? Does it lie on the president or does it lie on his advisors? But I think the distinction here, what I heard, the hour that I heard, is they were saying, was this act, they were trying to get specific, was this an official act or a private act in what he was asking for these electorates? They were getting very specific, at least the part, unless I missed something, George, you'll have to correct me.
No, I think this is going to get really sullied quickly. It's going to go back to the appellate system, and I don't know how in the world it's going to get resolved. I think you'll end up with one of two outcomes. Either they'll stay all proceedings that have anything to do with at the federal level, and that's going to have a huge benefit to Trump. And apart from apart from Bragg's case, and it may even affect Bragg's case, who knows? Any case that's going right now that has federal implications may be stayed, or they may send it back to the appellate system, like you said, to sort of remand it back for them to try to figure out exactly what is an official act versus a private act. And I think trying to work through those distinctions, I think it's going to be hopeless.
But I think it's going to come right back up to them.
I agree.
It's going to.
I agree.
I mean, you're just kicking the can down the road.
By the time it does, we'll be on the other side.
And it doesn't solve the problem ultimately moving forward for future presidents. And so there could be an as-applied ruling as well. This is either or isn't covered. Some of it is, most likely. Some of this conduct as described is covered, and so that these portions would be official acts. These portions wouldn't, and then maybe it could. Who knows what they're going to do?
What administration's appointed group is going to make the decision?
And that gets real fun real fast.
Yeah. Okay, we are going to take a break, and we will be right back with more on Sidebar. OAI. This is Sidebar. Our lawyer has stepped out of the room, but while he's gone, George, I wanted to ask you, you have information about several of the things that were said by, like, with Thomas and Alito that you wanted to address about the topic we have been talking about.
Well, I wanted to pick up where Nico left off because we were talking bouncing back and forth about Alito. Here's how the exchange went, and you could hear a pin drop. So Alito says, if the president gets advice from the attorney general that something is lawful, is that an absolute defense? Michael Dreeben, yes. Alito, wouldn't the president just pick an AG who'll let him do whatever he wants? Hey, how about them Yankees? So it was like, I mean, you could just hear a pin drop. Again, that does seem a kind of internal contradiction where the attorney general can provide absolute immunity, but the guy he works for doesn't have it. Implicitly or inherently.
Yeah, and so you're setting up this facade, essentially, and this fall guy. Again, I'm going to go back to the mafia example of how the mafia's original structure was the godfather or the don of the organization didn't want to get blamed for things, so they set up this hierarchy of an underboss, a consigliere, a capo regime, soldiers, associates, all the way down. I mean, we deal with this. But then under the RICO statute, it's really under the law of parties here in Texas, but under this RICO, Racketeering and Organized Corruption Act, that the organizational leader is held for the responsibilities of the organization that he leads, or she leads, theoretically. And that's why Osama bin Laden, I mean, there's no evidence that he handed out box cutters. There's no evidence that he taught someone how to fly a plane. There's no evidence that he gave them the plans or the schematics, but he took responsibility for the organization and ultimately was held accountable for it. So it's under that mindset that we're setting up this structure for the presidency. Yeah. But then you're saying, I guess Alito's question was, I didn't see that, and thank you for reading that. Alito was saying, well, then the AG is immune? I mean, you have qualified immunity for the AG because he's given an official act of advising the president? But was it a self-serving official act? You see where this goes? I mean, these minutia and these details matter ultimately if you're going to analyze this thing. And I think everyone's looking for a bright line rule. And they're looking for guidance. You can do A, B, and C. When people come to us and say, hey, what if I do this? And if somebody's on my yard and if they're yelling at me, but what if they knock on my door and I tell them to get off my door and then they're reaching for their pocket? I mean, they want permission that, you can shoot them or punch them. And I'm not going to give them that. The answer is always, it depends. From a good lawyer, because it's really fact specific.
And I could just see a kind of underlying get Trump because of these internal inconsistencies and basically where the solution becomes worse than the problem.
See, but I'm past get Trump. I'm for get any president now. We have to think about get any person.
I know, but when you're a communist, you don't think like that. When you're a communist, you think, I'm in power. I'm going to do everything I can to maintain power.
Yes.
And if I do that, then the scenario you just brought up, Mr. LaHood, is irrelevant because you're never going to have power again because I'll make sure that I stack the game in my favor.
Fair enough. And I understand that's the communistic playbook. I got it.
I guess what I'm saying is there's kind of an underlying, no holds barred, let's get Trump.
But then what's the answer? Is the answer to go the other way completely?
Well, I'd like to go
because think about the scenario. Let me ask you this. I'm going to interview you now. So what in your from your analysis, in your opinion, what do you think the right ruling should be, and what should be the role of immunity for a president? Because I want to know where you're coming from, and then I can put that in the analysis of what the Supreme Court justices were asking.
Well, I think we ought to go back to what we've been doing because it's been working pretty damn well for the last 250 years.
Say what that is.
The President of the United States has to have, and I like Sauer's caveat, he has to have absolute freedom to operate within the perimeter of his of the role, which is to watch out primarily for the security of the United States. But the United States, regardless of whatever needs to be done, needs to preserve from harm, either from the interior or from the exterior.
Okay.
So that's the president's
So does absolute freedom mean absolute immunity?
With the exception that in the event the president does something that is criminal or otherwise questionable or objectionable, there's a mechanism inside. We're back to Congress. So I'm saying we're back to Congress as a remedy.
So you're saying the remedy is to impeach, not to prosecute. I guess I'm trying to get to the bottom line.
What I'm saying is that it doesn't stop there. So if he's impeached in the House and the Senate, he's removed as president. What I'm hearing Sauer saying, the implication is that president now is open to criminal prosecution because he's cleared the impeachment hurdle.
Okay, so you're making a procedural argument then. You're not saying you're not making an absolute immunity.
Isn't
argument.
it all a procedural argument?
No, but I'm not. But no, okay. But if you get there procedurally, is there absolute immunity for the president? I mean, they gave examples. What about $1 million payoff, quid pro quo, for an appointment of an ambassador?
But that's what I'm saying. No, the answer is no. There isn't. And
I agree with that.
I don't think Sauer's saying that. I think that's what Sauer's saying. He's saying, look, he's saying there's a condition. The man has to be impeached in both chambers. Once he's impeached, he's out of the presidency. At that point, the gate's open. He could be criminally prosecuted.
Got you. So you're saying
that's how I'm reading it.
Okay, that's what I don't know if I didn't take that from him. Maybe there was a lot of questions back and forth. So you're saying that, you're saying Sauer is saying, and I didn't hear the finish of the argument, that we have to go through a procedural.
Correct.
If we have to procedurally
Correct.
get there, an impeachment, then that takes off this veneer of immunity to the president. You're saying that?
Yeah, I'm saying.
But then what about the argument that he shouldn't have been impeached in the first place? Because then the impeachment becomes a prosecution then.
Okay, that becomes a political argument. I get it. But let's go back to the Constitution for a moment. Because I think, and maybe I'm missing the nuances here, because I think Sauer's saying, look, we've operated for 2.5 centuries. Was everybody dumb? Nobody cared about crimes that whole time?
My retort to him on that would have been, we've never been so tribalistic. I mean, the thing,
exactly right.
I don't think that argument for me holds as much water, because
now that we're
in a whole different world. Yeah.
And now that we go back to checks and balances to make sure. And this is the genius of the founders: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. And even inside the legislative, there's even more bifurcation. You've got 2 chambers inside the legislature. So the founders believe that that's ultimately the check and balance system. Even for the president of the United States, Congress can hold the president accountable. There's a mechanism in the Constitution to do so. Now, if in fact the president is impeached, he's removed from office. This is why Nixon didn't apply, because Nixon didn't commit crimes. Nixon's acts were really of a personal nature. It was covering his own ass, and he was basically acting in a personal capacity. And so let's back up for just a moment. He clears that hurdle, like you said. He's impeached. He's out of the presidency. If he indeed committed crimes, he now can be brought up on criminal prosecution. But that hurdle has to be crossed. Congress has to be given due deference. But if Congress isn't, and any prosecutor can go after the presidency, you don't have a presidency.
I got you. So you're making a procedural argument, and that's fine. And I'm not opposed to that. I'm just saying, what if he's improperly impeached? Now what happens? Does the impeachment become the permission to prosecute? So you only have absolute immunity if you're not impeached? You see my point? That's why I think we need to address the absolute immunity, because then that's another safeguard. That's another, not absolute immunity, but whatever immunity a president has, that's the safeguard to an improper impeachment.
You're saying if the impeachment process is misused, I know that could never happen. If the impeachment process is misused, that's right. Yeah, elected representatives, that's the can of worms that you open then.
But my point is, then the impeachment becomes a prosecution. But if we address the immunity issue, it's a safeguard and a checks and balance against the improper impeachment.
But the problem that you just brought up, I think, is a far less problem than actually trying to clip the wings of a president while he's trying to operate as a chief executive officer of the United States. I think we're faced with picking poisons, to your point.
Yeah.
And so one poison will give you diarrhea, the other one will kill you. Which one do you want? I get it.
Obviously I want diarrhea over being killed. What's the matter with you, George?
But I think that's right.
I think diarrhea or throwing up.
I think your scenario, what if he's improperly impeached? I know. Everybody's wondering. Everybody's thinking,
choice. You got to say diarrhea or throwing up, not diarrhea or death. I mean,
well, let me just quote Thomas.
I hate diarrhea that much.
Thomas showed up with a question saying, hey, I know there's no absolute immunity in the Constitution. I get it. It's not clearly stated there. But the reality is, and this is what Thomas was saying, all of them have enjoyed it.
But
hold on. Yeah. All of them have enjoyed it. None of them have been prosecuted for clear crimes. So he then says, in the not so distant past, the presidents or certain presidents have engaged in various activities, coups, or Operation Mongoose when I was a teenager. He's referring again to a covert operation authorized by the president of the United States against Cuba. This wasn't a legal act per se. It wasn't cleared by Congress. The president just de facto decided to do that. And he said, look, there were no prosecutions. Why? He says, if what you're saying is right, it would seem that would have been ripe for criminal prosecution of someone. And this is what he told Dreeben. And so Dreeben says, so Justice Thomas, I think this is a central question. The reason why there have not been any prior criminal prosecutions is that there have been no crimes. That's breathtaking.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting that Thomas said that. I mean, I
okay.
think... No, I'm not interesting. No, I'm just saying, because you play that out. Because then, is there a grandfather clause? Because you still have Bush is still alive. Clinton's still with us. Obama's still with us. I mean, so then is there a grandfather
and
clause?
even Carter.
And what's the statute of limitations on their analysis? Carter, yeah, poor guy. I mean, so you got all this going on. Do you go back and do you say, okay, this is grandfathered in, this is moving from this point forward? That would look very specific towards Trump then.
I know, but it doesn't stop there.
Right.
But it doesn't stop there. And I knew you would have caught him on this.
Yeah.
So then Alito jumps in and says, well, what about President Roosevelt's decision to intern Japanese Americans during World War II? Couldn't that have been charged? Dreeben says, well, today, yes. Okay, so didn't this guy just say that there have not been any crimes before?
Oops.
So my point is, this is why it's hard for me to step away, Nico, and not see a get Trump.
Oh, no.
underlying-
I don't think anybody thinks that this is not a get Trump moment. But it's forcing us to analyze something that hasn't been brought to their attention before, and obviously is going to be the new norm moving forward. And we just got to be careful what new norm we set.
Yes.
I don't think Justice Jackson was thinking. She clearly, in what I heard, it seemed. I mean, she was almost litigating against Sauer or whatever, and that's fine. I mean, they get to, throw balls and strikes at these guys, but I think we need to be careful moving forward because this is going to be the new standard. We have reached into it. We have gone into a new area that I wish we hadn't gone into, but we have. And there's a lot of new normals.
But had you been on the court, I think. And maybe I'm wrong, but you'd almost have to concede that at least implicitly, presidents for the last 2.5 centuries have operated as if they've had absolute immunity or absolute powers. And the proof's in the pudding. Where are the prosecutions? Now, I get it. At this point in time, we can analyze it for the tribalistic nature of the country. I get it. But for 2.5 centuries. And so the question stemmed around that. And the reality is that there have been coups. There have been there's been bombing of civilians.
Sure,
right?
But they're going to claim that those were official acts that were in the best interest of the United States.
There's been lying.
Sure.
There's been efforts for regime change and toppling governments. And so, what's going on now that's different? And then it comes. That's what it comes
legally.
down
I know
to.
we're going to break, but legally, I think it's going to boil down to, because we got other topics to talk about, is what's an official act and not. And I don't think anything's going. They're not going to give him absolute immunity. And I'm not saying that's the right thing.
But
to
he
do.
doesn't need it to escape the prosecution.
Fair enough. Yes, I agree.
Now, so.
Strategically, yes.
Okay, where did the hour go? We only have one more segment. You got to stick with us. We'll be right back with more on Sidebar.
With reputations as respected high-level prosecutors in Bexar County, the attorneys of
SidebarTV.com, where this conversation will continue on social media platform. What is going to happen to this? Because the question I asked is, why are they doing this when they know what could happen to them if Trump gets into office and it all turns around?
Well, it's a gamble. I mean, who knows? I mean, look, this is an interesting legal issue that is, as we can tell, just our discussion shows, and listening to the arguments in front of SCOTUS shows the minutia, and everyone's looking for a bright line rule. We're not going to get it. Yeah. I think we have some fringe examples. If you bribe a president for an ambassadorship, or if you if you murder or kill your political opponent, those are okay. Obvious, good, great, check. We got that. Now we start moving towards the middle and saying, okay, what about this act? Well, it depends. It depends on what? Depends on whether that was in the best interest of the United States or not. And well, but it wasn't. Well, who says? I think it was because this. It's kind of like having a divorce case where what's in the best interest of the child, and then you look at the totality of the circumstances. So it's going to come down to that. I don't think we're going to get any clear line on this. I think we may get an as-applied ruling like Patrick suggested, maybe not. But even if it gets kicked down and remanded for a Brewster's analysis, that strategically benefits President Trump.
But how does get back to Patrick on that? I don't want to lose sight of that. It's important.
Okay.
How does an as-applied ruling, how does that bring clarity?
It don't. And he's not saying it does. He's just predicting.
He wasn't suggesting it brought clarity.
No, he's not saying
that's where it's going to land.
He just thinks that's a possibility. Yeah, no, he's not saying that should be the.
How does it? I think you got to split court. Nico and I were just kind of trying to wax eloquent. I was trying. He was waxing eloquent on this, on the legalities. A few days ago, we were talking, how's this going to come down? Probably a 5-4 or a 6-3.
So then what happened?
A 5-4 for what, though?
Well, I think just in terms of remanding it back, basically remanding it back to the appellate system, versus doing what the liberals on the court, or left-wing people on the court want to do, which is to basically say that the president doesn't enjoy immunity, which I think would be insane. I do believe they're that crazy. I do that for the purposes of the matter.
I think the left side of the court is going to say the president does enjoy immunity, but not for this.
Oh my God!
Exactly. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Which is basically to say the president doesn't have immunity because it's ambiguous.
No, this president doesn't have immunity.
This act. I mean, the act, because it all comes down to the determination of what he was doing, find votes versus create votes. I mean, that's a fact question. And that's why they were saying, well, couldn't that be a jury instruction and all this other? You could tell what they were thinking, that it's this specific fact pattern that may not be. But I know we got to talk about all kinds of other stuff in campuses.
I'll turn it over to the conductor.
Yep. Representative Johnson.
We only have like 10 minutes, so what do you want to talk about?
Kurt can't get us off.
Yeah.
He'll pull the plug on us.
Well, I think you were asking a question, and it might have been, I don't know if you were trying to transition with the question, but I think it ultimately transitions us, because you were saying, why don't they ever think that this could happen to them? Mm-hmm. And the reality, and Nico and I were just sort of chatting here off air, because power is institutional today. And this is unprecedented in American history. It's never been this institutional. It's cross-institutional. You've got communists who have control of the executive branch, communists who are basically running roughshod in Congress right now. Yes, I realize that we have Republicans theoretically in a majority, but it's a paper-thin majority. It's a majority of one. And so you have Democrats that are basically leveraging their power to basically get Republicans to do what they want to do. And the latest Ukraine bill, I think, is a really good example of that. So that's institutional there. And then you've got, can we argue, is there any argument that American academic institutions aren't under the control of Marxists? That between administrations and faculty and students, that this isn't under control of a Marxist ideology of power over persuasion? Your average human resources department or your average corporation, what do you think makes up a human resource manual? It's left-wing ideology. It's everywhere you look, it's intersectionality. You look at our bureaucracies and our agencies, even the military. It's American culture and American institutions are suffused with communistic thought right now. And so I think, Nico, they're taking gambles that they normally would never take. I don't believe. I think they're afraid. I think Trump represents for them an existential danger of the loss of power. They're most afraid of Trump right now than any other politician. But outside of Trump, I don't think these guys are afraid of anything or anyone. If it wasn't for Trump right now, there would be absolutely nothing to limit a roughshod run over of American traditional norms. I think people don't appreciate
when I talk to people that lean left or that are just opposed to a conservative Republican, quote unquote, set of mindset, which I don't think they understand what it means. I really try to pause, and I encourage people to do this, kind of pause. And if you have this opportunity to speak professionally and respectfully to the person that you're talking to, I mean, play it out. I mean, you have to play things out. I mean, this is an exercise in critical thinking. What set of ideas are you really advocating? Can you take the label off the idea and let's just talk about the idea? Do we like an idea where students forget about what they're protesting for just a second? You have to compartmentalize this stuff. To shut down schools, to block roadways. I'm like I said, as close to a free speech absolutist as you're going to get. I think I showed that in posts I make and people that make comments about special needs kids, about my faith, about things. You have a right to say it. I can call it disgusting. I can tell you to go F off. You can tell me to F off, whatever, and whether that's going to be productive or not, but you have a right to say it. But we have to, this is past that. There's a line. Where's that line where what they're saying versus how they're saying it, and is it interrupting other people's enjoyment of rights? I mean, who the hell wants to go to Columbia now? Or New York? I mean, now they're distance learning. So first it was COVID, and now they're back to learning from home. I mean, and they're paying all that money for that crap. I mean, go somewhere else. I mean, so, and then the schools, to your point, George, not taking the right actions. Again, say what you want. The protests in the old days, you had a group of people, you had some signs, you yelled as much as you want to. You didn't stop people, you didn't assault anybody, and you didn't invade, administrative buildings. That's trespass. It's trespass, just simple trespass laws. You've been given notice to leave on private property. You have not left. You're guilty of trespassing. And then obstruction of the highway when you block roads. I mean, it's really easy to me. It may not be. It's simple, not easy. Maybe it's simple when you analyze law and facts. Maybe not easy. It would be for me to implement these because you have to bring order. You even need to order, Karen. In my opinion, you need order and disagreement, or else you have chaos. What's the difference between a bar fight and a jury trial? Order. I mean, because some jury trials are, they get intense, man. Yeah. And if it wasn't for everybody respecting that person in the red in the black robe, and the bailiff there that has the right to arrest people, and a jury that has a duty, and the lawyers that have a duty, I mean, it's order. That's the only thing different. Literally, the only difference between a jury trial, an intense jury trial, and a bar fight is order.
And that's the problem, because Marxist communism has waged war on order. If you read the Communist Manifesto,
sure.
What his argument is, we need a revolutionary reconstitution of society. It's not a persuasive model, as you know.
Right.
A court of law insists on persuasion. It insists on fact patterns. It insists on laws of evidence, right? It insists on testing that evidence, good arguments, right? Solid premises, logical conclusions, all that stuff out the window. The only thing that matters, again, and I'm quoting, if you read in the opening pages of the Communist Manifesto from Marx and Engels in 1848, that's the verbiage that they use. The ultimate goal here in this class warfare, in this cultural warfare, what do you call it? Tribalism.
Yeah.
The ultimate goal is the revolutionary reconstitution of society. That was in February of 1848. Fast forward a few months later, and I just want to quote him because then he talks about how the mechanisms of how it's done, Nico. So he wrote the manifesto in February of 1848. A few months later, in November, he says this: there's only one way in which the murderous death agonies of the old society. You want to know why they're protesting? You want to know why they're talking about death to America on our own universities? Here's a little insight. There's only one way in which the murderous death agonies of the old society and the bloody birth throes of the new society can be shortened, simplified, and concentrated, and that way is revolutionary terror. Blood will run. This is a feature. It's not a bug in Marxism. What we're seeing on college campuses aren't students with a point. These are revolutionaries. They believe they're childish and foolish, and they see the world in good and evil. They don't see somebody who just disagrees, as we have to say.
Oppress and oppressor. Yeah,
they see good and evil. This is a system that needs to be destroyed. And remember how we talked about this as institutional? Anthony Blinken just hired a new head of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Zakiya Carr-Johnson, I think is her name. And she has said that basically the United States is built on a failed model. And that failed model is suffused with racism and misogyny. And it's hopeless. It needs to be razed to the ground, and we got to start over.
Yeah, people need to really take that in and think about what that means. And disagreeing with an aspect of this country doesn't mean burn it down, because then what are you going to replace it with? When people, complain or bitch about something, I always say, okay, let me hear what you have to say. But then what's your solution? I mean, someone that's just throwing stones. If you're saying, I'm going to remodel that house, but I'm going to do the demolition, what are you going to remodel it? What it's going to look like? How are you going to build it? Is it going to be any better than the part that you demoed because you're building a bad structure in the first place? And it might look good for a little while, but down the road in 10 more years, it's going to have cracks and this and that, and we're going to have to demolition that. And then we've lost our country. And so I really try to encourage people to play things out. Get into the heart of the idea that either side is advocating, because my tribe is truth, because not all truth is the same. That's ultimately, my tribe is the truth. Now, I believe, in my humble opinion, that there's one political platform that has more truth than the other one right now in this season, because in the past it hasn't always been that way, right? But in this season, there's one that has more truth. But I'm still going to give you an analysis of truth. I mean, I got to get down back to the foundation of the principles that we're advocating. My worldview is obviously biblical. I don't force it on people, but I will debate with them on it. And if we start losing, this is what this signals to me. I know we got a minute, and then we'll finish this on the after show for 30 minutes if you guys can join us. If we break down, what we're seeing in universities is the breakdown of the model of persuasion. And there's two ways to control people: to persuade them through talking or through force and violence. And if we get down to the force and violence, then the only way that you say, screw talking, I'm going to get more forceful and more violent to push my point. And then they're going to have to get more forceful. And then we have back to the jungle and the lions and the zebras and the devouring and the lack of moral compass. And then this country is done. So, look, guys, we're wrapping up. Karen, with your permission,
please,
join us on the after show.
Continue.
We're going to take a 30-second break. We'll switch over. Salo's with us. Maybe he'll jump in a little bit and we can hear his Pepe Le Pew. Or, sorry, Speedy Gonzalez voice. Sorry, but all right, guys, God bless you. Have a wonderful weekend. Thanks for joining in.
Okay, I'm turning it on. Where's that other microphone?
You're
You don't
on.
wanna-
We're live with the French Saulo
French.
Rodriguez. How did I turn you? I turned Saulo French. I said he was Pepe Le Pew instead of Speedy Gonzalez. I'm sorry, Saulo. Am I racist?
It's okay. Did you like Pepe Le Pew? First of all.
I did like Pepe Le
Okay,
Pew.
there we
He
go.
was funny,
What
man.
did you like
He was
about
funny.
Pepe Le Pew?
Just his stupidness. I mean, when I was younger.
Was he a
no,
misogynist?
Sure he was, but I mean, it was just, but it was
an
funny.
exaggeration.
It was an
It was
exaggeration.
Hilarious.
Right?
It was an
Yeah.
exaggeration. Nobody took him serious.
He would touch the other what?
And they'd slap him and this.
Yeah,
and
and talk.
But isn't it funny how society has changed? That's,
Totally,
it's-
totally.
Well, but look, don't get me started. I mean, Don Rickles,
Yeah.
Fred Sanford, Archie Bunker, the Jeffersons. I mean, those were the days
It was
where
to
you
show
could.
the
it's fun.
exaggeration
Yes.
that
Man,
exists.
If you just think of the stereotypes there, it's what makes it funny. You
Yes,
got this
man.
French striped skunk
Yeah,
who's on a constant quest for the squeeze.
Yeah.
that's
Right?
a good way to
And-
put
and-
it.
And he reeks. But I mean, he's ultimately kind of lovable.
Are you saying
I mean,
French people reek?
I am kind of saying
Saulo, see that? You heard it first.
Wow, look at
Sidebar.
where we start. Hey, let me tell you this. You say you're a free speech absolutist,
Almost,
right?
almost. As
I
close
would
to
love
it.
for you to go to a session of Kill Tony.
What's that?
Wait, what is that?
Okay, Joe Rogan has his. What's the name of the mothership? The comedy mothership in Austin.
Okay.
And he's saying and he's promoting that anybody that comes there, it's going to be what they can do any type of comedy. They will not be cancelable. It's the most uncancelable place to be.
Good.
Now they do another session where they get people that sign up that they want to do comedy, and they just give them a minute of comedy. They could do whatever they want. It is so crazy. It is so messed up. Roseanne's bar's been there. All the comedians have been there. But their comedy, bro, it would test you because they say a lot of crazy stuff.
But see, but the answer to that is don't go.
Yeah, of course.
That's the answer, but they should be able to say it.
But to me, I'm a free speech guy too. But there's a point I'm like, okay, is this too much? Is this in my mind?
But see, but you're given a different analysis. So for morally, because I know that's your worldview, you're a biblical-minded man as well. Yes, there's too much. I mean, there just is. It's called cruelty. I mean, don't let your, the power of life and death, Proverbs says, is in the tongue. Are you speaking life or death over somebody? So you're morally going to be held accountable for your speech. Every word that comes out of your mouth. Yeah. And people say, that's why do you use cuss and why do you use slang words? Those are slang words. It's not whatever, but that's a different topic. But I'm just saying, you're talking about, are you breaking people down or building them up? And that's what Ephesians 4.29 talks about. When don't let unwholesome words come out of your mouth. It's actually talking about that, but only what builds up the hearer. Keep reading. And so if I'm breaking you down, forget about me dropping an F-bomb. I mean, I could call you a worthless piece of dog crap and not say the F word at all and be morally wrong versus me using a slang word that society doesn't like. So there's a moral analysis and then there's a constitutional analysis. And I keep them separate.
Have you ever been roasted?
Unofficially, not officially. like
Every day.
we're in a group, and then somebody at the office will jokingly say something, and then it's like, what the fuck? What did this turn into a roast? You know? And they start busting my balls.
Have you ever been roasted publicly?
My whole life's an unofficial roast.
Hey God, it was God. No, I'm joking.
Yeah.
And I'm okay, and I'm totally okay with that, man.
It's fun.
If you can't laugh at yourself, you got serious
my God, I
problems.
laugh at impersonation. Like Maya does impersonations of me.
Yeah, really?
Oh, brother, you know how funny she is.
Record that.
Oh, I don't record shit.
Remember,
but I mean,
back in the day, some cities would have like a city event, and they would roast like the presidential thing that they used to do.
Brother, the Dean Martin roast.
That's true.
I love those. I mean,
Yeah.
go YouTube. Dean and Don Rickles would have never survived today.
Yeah.
He's making black jokes with Sammy Davis, Wilt Chamberlain, Red Fox, and they're laughing their asses off.
Yeah.
And then they get up and they bust his balls.
Nobody's safe.
Nobody's. It's funny. The Puerto Ricans.
Reagan's on there. He's governor.
Oh, that was funny.
Governor, that's one of my favorites.
Yes.
The one with Reagan.
Yeah.
Did you see the Donald Trump roast at the
I
Comedy
think
Central? Comedy Central did a roast of Donald Trump
Before he was president?
Yeah, you haven't seen it?
Oh, no.
God, oh my
Was
goodness.
he there? He was there? He's laughing?
Yes, they made fun of him wanting to sleep with every woman, including his daughter. And his daughter's right there.
Oh, my Lord.
And they made fun of his hair. They made fun of his skin. They
And
made
he
fun
took
of
it all. And he took
yeah.
it.
And
Nothing
you know
was
what?
safe.
Nothing's
Wow,
safe.
I
One
didn't
of
see
Sarah
that.
Silverman, I think it's Sarah, she says that she's roasting him and she's nervous. And he's just making faces. And at the end, he says, comes up to her afterwards and he goes, that was good. Those ones were good. Like he acknowledges that
This
they
is
were
before he
good.
was president.
Yes.
Okay,
You gotta watch
I gotta
it.
see
It's
it. I know.
impressive.
Yeah, and I think we've lost
That's
the ability
funny.
to laugh.
Yeah.
We've completely lost the ability.
Look, like for me, so Carlos Mencias got me, and I quit watching him after this. And maybe I shouldn't have completely watched, but when he was making fun of special needs people, physical disabilities, like, and he's doing this, and it's just not funny to me. Now, this is before we had Michael, who's on the spectrum of autism, because
That
my
was
aunt.
before.
This is before it still offended me, because my aunt is special needs.
Okay, got it.
My
Okay,
mom's
got it.
sister, Missy, she doesn't have Down syndrome. She has cognitive disabilities. And so I've always been sensitive, me personally,
Gotcha.
to jokes that make fun of special needs people, because it's not, you're making fun of a character. I mean, you'll make fun of someone's nose, whatever. I mean, people make fun of other stuff about me, and that's fine. My little brother has a bigger Lebanese nose. You make fun of, and he laughs at that, and I'm cool. I'm slender. People make skinny jokes or whatever. Although I'm not skinny, but I mean, I'm defensive. Fuck you. No, but I'm just saying, you got to be able to laugh, you know, at stuff like that. But I've always been defensive,
Nico,
even about special needs jokes.
I have a Down syndrome cousin, Abelito.
Okay.
And it's funny because my brother makes fun of him like you cannot imagine. I won't say the jokes here.
Yeah.
And I don't make fun of him, but he makes fun of himself. And it's the weirdest thing.
Interesting.
If you see him, he knows that he's taking advantage of him being Down syndrome to take missionaries' money.
Now
and he knows.
Now, see, that's playful. That's playful banter within a family. But then I think that can be that's like someone saying, "Well, I'm black, so I can use the N word, but you can't." Well, then you shouldn't use it either. If the N word's bad, the N word's bad. You know what I mean? That's to me. I mean,
but where we are today is that we try to censor stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so if I don't like it, I just turn it off. I don't listen to it. I would never suggest that we would try to control it or censor it through government fiat.
Yeah.
And that's where we are today. We've lost I think that's a huge shift in American culture. You look at the Dean Martin roast and you look at where we are today. The culture at that time would never think to censor that. You got to really crush those impulses.
I was so expecting Eddie Murphy to go back on tour because that's what they were talking.
I remember his raw was mild. Now,
Yeah.
No, not the one before, Delirious. The one Delirious. He's the one that goes on stage and he says, "You know what? People tell me because I make fun of homosexuals, right?" He says, "I'm going to tell you why I make fun of homosexuals because they're homosexuals."
Stupid ass.
As simple as that, right? But I'm
Well,
like,
Dave Chappelle to me is over the
He's a
top,
genius, the
man.
way
He's a
he's-
genius. I
we
mean, the
went
guy
to the
cracks
Andrew
me up,
Schultz
man.
comedy show.
Andrew Schultz is funny too, man.
Bro, no, live, right? Hey,
He's good?
live. They had a baby, right? And he thought he was the man he could produce. His eggs were not healthy.
His sperm, you mean?
Yeah,
He doesn't have
He
eggs.
says,
What
so
do you-
let me give you one
matter
joke. Can I
with
say
his
one
eggs?
of the jokes he says?
Progressive?
I hope he goes. Remember, he says the doctor comes up to him and they checked his wife. His wife is okay, and then he comes and checks his sperm or whatever, and he says, "Sir, I am sorry about your Tyrones."
Your what?
Your Tyrones, your sperm, because they can't swim.
He says that?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, look. I had a buddy of mine. I won't say his name. He's kind of he's a high profile dude, and he happens to be black. And he used to make Mexican jokes and Lebanese jokes, and I used to make black jokes at him, and we laughed our asses off, man. And
Well,
it's-
give me
it
one.
was-
Give me one for now,
No,
just so I can come in.
No. I mean, the Lebanese jokes. Look, I get all the raghead jokes, the camel jock.
What's a Lebanese joke?
I mean, just
What's
any
a
Middle Eastern
stereotypical?
joke. I mean, anything. I mean, if Nico's half Mexican, half Lebanese. He doesn't know whether to steal your car or blow it up. Ha 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 ha. All that kind of stuff.
Okay.
I mean, stuff like that. I mean, and it's fun, and we laugh, and we go all back and forth. It's just look, we've lost that, and that's why I think the Bill Maher's of the world have pushed back, and Bill Maher has been a friend to the conservative. Because the classical liberal used to be the one defending free speech. Now the conservatives defending free speech, and the left person is for the censorship.
Yeah.
It's that's why I say let's get down deeper and as in a transition. Let's get to principles, not to because the tribal may change, the ideals of the tribe may change. I don't know, but the principle is going to stay true no matter what. Who's advocating it? So that's why I try to peel away labels. Of course, I mean, you get labeled at some point, and get down to the principle and the idea that's being advocated. That's
I think
the
I
one
need to reset myself in that because now I start feeling horrible when they start over making fun of white people because they want to be mean,
Right.
not because it's part of a joke.
Right.
But they just want to be mean. And
Yeah.
that to me, I'm like, okay.
Yeah,
And
but
y'all are
look at the
talking-
Jeffersons, Karen.
Yes.
We're going with the honky and this or that and all this other stuff, and then it was
You
almost
finally got a piece of the pie. That was
Yeah.
part of the
that's true.
song.
That's so true.
It's like,
Wow.
what, y'all are
Times
talking
have
about
changed.
old comedians, but I find personally that the young people, they don't even have a sense of humor anymore about a lot of things.
in society. You mean?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree
yes.
with that.
Because
I agree.
they're too obsessed with wanting to live by a cause, the dumbest causes.
But there are so many causes.
Yes,
that
because so they'll get
they can't
offended.
laugh at any
And
of
because
them.
you can't touch their causes, they get offended.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so disturbing.
But yeah. But back to
Okay, that was
our
nice.
father,
That-
Donald Trump.
We've never spent so much money on education. We've never been so less educated.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, raises the question what we've been talking about over the last hour and a half. And I know you're looking at me like, how in the world am I going to transition back from this?
That was a good break.
You
Thanks,
can do
Salo. Good
it.
job.
Silos-
You can
It started
do
with
it.
Pepe Le Pew.
From
Yeah.
Silo's
Pepe Le Pew.
Tyrones and men having eggs. We're talking about
Well, in regards
Mike
to
Johnson.
that, in regards to that, Palestine, right? All this stuff. When all these protests started happening in the colleges, and I'm like, what? Austin, and then San Antonio had one, and I'm like, thank God for young people. But I started thinking,
Who are these people?
they're not. I'm like,
No.
I don't have much faith in these young people to start creating rallies at the same time, very well coordinated. I'm like,
Yeah.
it's not the college students.
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you.
There's a madness. Go ahead.
I'll tell you what I don't have confidence in young people is in their ability to problem solve.
Yeah.
Oh, you're
That-
right.
that's what I want.
Right.
What I try to teach Maya, she's the oldest, our 15, is to problem solve and to critical think. I mean, we don't coddle her. I ask her opinions as they defend your position. And then when she has a trouble with a teacher or whatever, how are you going to deal with it? What are you going to do? What's your next step? Papi's not coming in right now.
Where are you going to hit her?
I don't. Well, that's the last resort for anybody, not towards a teacher. I'm saying to defend yourself. But I said, well, how are you going to respond to this? What's your next step? How are you going to make this argument? What if this person says this? And we're going through this this little trial. And I'm preparing her for this, and she's navigated situations with teachers, and she's made an appointment to speak to the higher up, and then she had a meeting with them, and then this, and I didn't step in once. I was ready to, but I didn't step in once. She's got to solve problems.
Yeah.
Period.
Well, notice how he said. Nico just said, "Well, she's got to solve problems. We don't coddle her," and that's the problem. If you're coddled, you can't problem solve because you're isolated from reality. We have actually institutionalized and we subsidize safe spaces at our universities right now. When students are challenged with something that goes against the grain of everything of the indoctrination that they've been taught, they need a safe space. Universities have institutionalized that thinking. If you're challenged and you're offended in some way, if somebody challenges you with a narrative that goes against your narrative right now, say your anti-Israel narrative, somebody actually comes in with something called history and tells you what's actually happened between history and so-called Palestine over the last 75 years, right? And it goes against your grain and you're offended. You're given a safe space. And you go in there and you're given coloring books. I'm not making this up. This is true.
Yeah.
Whether it's the college university or the college common, you're given coloring books, you're given bubbles, you're given videos of puppies, maybe even real puppies in some cases,
Where is that
lollipops and
happening?
ice cream.
Some colleges.
Oh,
They have some rooms where they
No,
can
this is
step
everywhere.
in.
This is
Yeah,
everywhere.
yeah.
Dr. Everett Piper in No Safe Spaces documents university after university after university. And the point is, and this is to get back to your point here, there's a coddling. You are isolated from objective reality. You're only indoctrinated. And you are taught to be completely intolerant. This is why you can't persuade. Because the second someone starts to bring forth an idea that's different than what you've been indoctrinated in, then the appropriate response is to be offended. This is conditioned. You should be offended. You should be angry. And then that's got to come out somewhere. So these explosions of rage that we've seen across the country, that's all been bred. It's been taught. This is the education.
And that becomes your righteousness. Like if they're offended for something they don't like,
It's religious. So
totally.
to Nico's point, you can't problem solve and be coddled.
Yeah.
So you're right. They can't solve problems because they don't know a fucking thing about anything. They haven't been taught anything. They haven't been taught reality. They haven't been taught history. They haven't been taught real science. They don't understand anything about anything. You have minds full of mush, to steal an old expression from Rush Limbaugh. And so the only thing they're good for, and this is why the government is all in. The only thing they're good for is rage and destruction. They've been created for rage and destruction. And you can see it in the language that they're using. We are Hamas, they say. Can you believe we're actually seeing that?
That's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up. I was talking to somebody that was sensitive to what they're protesting. And I said, that's irrelevant to me. It's how they're doing it that matters to me. So there's two different levels of analysis. How are they protesting? And is it really a protest or is it a disruption? And it's a violation of a law or administrative rule. And then number two, we can talk about death to America and I am Hamas. You have to think about that. I am Hamas is different than support Gaza and Palestinians. They're separate issues to me, completely separate issues. That's like saying I am, what's that, the Unabomber dude, whatever his name was. Kaczynski, whatever his name is, whatever, I pronounced it wrong. But he's American. I'm saying like, I support America, but I am the Unabomber. Well, shit, there's different issues. He's an American, but he's a crazy American. So I break these things up into behavior and ideology behind what you're advocating. Because then things get grouped together. I think we saw that with all the different the protests in the past. Things get grouped together, and that doesn't work in a courtroom. Because you can get grouped together and either get a conviction or we have to separate things and analyze behavior. And so when you say I am Hamas, you have to think about what that means. So what does Hamas stand for? What has Hamas done? What is Hamas advocating to be done? What is Hamas's ultimate goal? In a perfect world, what would Hamas want to create? And what would Hamas do to someone like you if you really lived in an
bigger
environment where
question,
Hamas is
but-
in control. Because you're not saying I support, you're saying I am. So you're a representative of Hamas, and that means you're advocating for what. So I really break down and push
and that's
back.
important.
Yeah.
You got to break it down
Yeah.
to say they're not. They claim to be against injustice when they're actually not. They're just against the boogeyman that they've been told is a boogeyman. And through lies and distortions, Israel is the boogeyman. And I just keep coming back to this: anti-Israel is anti-America here, because Israel is an American, really the only democratic outpost in a sea of Islamic radicalism. If you look at Israel, they are substantively different. I'm just talking about religion. Israel doesn't get its wealth from oil. Every other Arab nation there is a step away from abject poverty if not for oil revenue. They don't really produce anything. There's really no innovation. There's no research coming out of there. Where are the new ideas? If you look at Israel, it really is a microcosm of America. And these people see Israel as white America in the Middle East. So a hit against Israel is mindless, but it's really a hit against their own. It's against America. So to them, there's no difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism. It's all the same thing. And I just have to step back and wonder, Nico, how is it that 1,200 Jews brutalized, bombed in their own home, raped, tortured, decapitated, how is it that that didn't matter? Yeah. And that, so Hamas's brutality didn't matter. Only Israel's so-called
Retaliation.
genocide.
Have you seen
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen the videos of people talking about the 21-minute video compilation that Israel put together to show some of the press corps and to show some, even Tony Blinken? You saw. I mean, we talked about this back then. Tony Blinken's. Look, I've seen horrible scenes.
The forensic work was done
I've seen
in Israel, and the Times of Israel reported it.
I've seen
in detail. You can look it up.
Yeah, I've seen horrible videos, and it changes you. I mean, it changes you. I mean, you can tell when somebody has seen trauma, when they're under trauma because they've seen evil or tragic or and brutality and whatever. People don't understand it, and some of the people that have reported what they saw, the rapes and yes, babies in ovens and decapitations, and not with a decapitation machine with a backhoe, like a something for your garden, which obviously is a butcher job. I mean, and then the shooting and the killing parents in front of kids. I mean, it was brutal. Some people cried.
And then you hear the audio of one of the audios that I heard. It was the guy calling his mom.
Yeah.
And he says, "I'm with Dad," and he says, "We just killed the whole family," and they're crying in celebration that, "Hey, Mom, we just killed a whole family of Jews."
Yes.
Now,
Now-
it wasn't just that moment.
Now-
You're hearing a whole generation.
Now
that's-
let's lay this out. Does that mean that anybody that calls what Hamas did evil and that Israel didn't deserve that, is that defending all actions that Israel's ever done from their inception? Of course not. I mean, at least that's not my position. No. I mean, again, I try to make analysis. Two things can be true at one time. Israel can be imperfect. I mean, all you got to do is study Scripture. I mean, read the Old Testament. Read the book of Judges, by the way. I mean, so no, I'm not taking a position as an apologist for Israel and all their actions. And going back to this absolute versus qualified immunity analysis, I guess can apply to this too. But I think George's analysis is accurate when you think about what Israel stands for. And you can still differentiate between whether Israel acted appropriately in this one setting versus does that mean that opens them up to that and a continued that. And the idea that these countries around them have said, we will not rest until Israel is destroyed. I mean, that puts you in a whole different ballgame.
Correct.
And so does that make you make the best decisions all the time? No, you don't. People don't understand what it means when someone hates you. If most people can't take if someone sits in front of you, and I'm just going to say it. Okay, I'm not
keep going.
I was I won't use Karen because you're a female. George, I fucking hate you. I fucking hate you. And every chance I get, look at me. Every chance I get, I'm going to do everything I can to fucking hurt you, kill your kids, screw you over. Don't ever fall asleep. Sleep with your eye open because every chance I get, check under your car, look behind the bushes, test your drinking water. I'm going to fucking get you. It's not win. It's not if, it's when. Remember that. That's a different discussion.
And if I'm the American government, I would say, well, let's negotiate.
Well, no, but I'm trying to make it real. I mean, do you see my point?
that's the point.
Now, that again, I'm not, and someone correct me, I'm not claiming to be an expert, but I know what I've seen and I've studied, okay? I've studied enough. That's really the mindset, Karen, when you look at this stuff.
Yeah.
That's horrible.
That's
That's
exactly-
evil.
And there is no
Right.
negotiation.
There is no
There's no
negotiation.
yeah.
Ever.
There is no exit ramp here for Israel in the minds of these lunatics on college campuses because Israel is inexorably evil. They have to be exterminated. It's not about injustice. If it is, where are all the campus protests against Chinese concentration camps? They're all over the place, specifically in the Xinjiang province in China. We have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, actually. I'm being low here. I'm being conservative, so I don't overstate it, of Uyghur Muslims being exterminated. Really, being exterminated in China. Where are the protests on college campuses? We've got governments across the world right now that are brutalizing their citizens. Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Syria. Where are the protests?
Yeah.
Is this really about social justice?
Well,
is
then-
it about the
but see,
marginalized?
what George is
Bullshit.
doing, he's pushing back on the ideology and the ideas. Look,
It's not about social justice. It's about identity.
Well, sure. This is my point. That's what you're pushing back on. Yeah. And so I had a discussion with somebody about genocide. And I said, well, let's look up what it means. And then let's see if it applies. So Israel committing genocide, has there been horrific deaths? Sure. I mean, are there casualties of war? Yes. Where's here again, I'm going to be the ignorant interviewer for a second, like Salo likes to do. Okay, so where's the responsibility on Hamas to not, hide in amongst innocent people?
Yep.
Where's I'm just asking. That's a question that has to be contended with. Where are the cries for Hamas to surrender? If they've done evil, and we have to define if they did evil. See, it goes down to someone's ideology and their definitions. If Israel, if your indictment is that Israel is committing genocide, they're not good at it and they're very capable of it.
Yeah.
I mean, Israel could have wiped out Gaza. I mean, does anyone think that with their military capability and what they can and can't, minus October 7th blunder and how they let their guard down on that, will anyone objectively question whether Israel is capable of violence? You don't think they could have wiped out could they have committed true genocide by now? Yeah. I mean, sure. I mean, all I'm saying is I'm not trying to. You have to contend with these things. Yeah. And here's the question I asked somebody. What did Hamas do evil on October 7th? Forget about who deserved it. I mean, I guess you can I don't know how they deserved it, but that's another analysis. But did they commit evil? If the answer is no, then we have a bigger problem. If the answer is yes, where's the accountability for that? And then what does it look like? I get it. There's not a carte blanche. They don't. Israel doesn't get to do whatever they want. I think that's the argument. I think some people. I want to be fair. Some people legitimately say, yes, I don't support Hamas. Screw Hamas. I don't agree with what they did. They did evil, in my definition of evil. But what Israel is doing is more evil or equal evil, and they're doing this comparison because now they've overcorrected. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm thinking about it slightly differently, but really coming to the same conclusion that you are. Let's say that Israel was in fact guilty of everything they said. Let's just say all their lies and distortions are actually true for the sake of argument. Okay. And Israel is absolutely despotic and tyrannical. How in the world does it make it okay what Hamas did? Right. And not once was there any repudiation of Hamas's acts? I mean, and they were vicious acts of brutality.
They're bad, man. They got really
vicious acts of brutality. So that tells you something. There's something religious. There's an undercurrent, a religious view here. There is it's almost this sort of childish, foolish view of reality. Israel is in the same pot as traditional America. Not only are they a religious precursor of the Christianity that has suffused America and influenced America, but again, Israel is seen as a white foreign outpost of American thinking and American power. And so they're hated in equal measure. Mm-hmm. That's the issue here. They're prosperous, and we dare not have people who are prosperous in Marxist communism. Because if you are prosperous in Marxist communism, then you are necessarily exploitative. You've gamed the system. There is no way you can actually have what's called a profit. Marx called it a surplus of labor. You don't have a right to make a profit. If you make a profit, then you have absolutely exploited someone. You've stolen from them. Now, Israel is unbelievably prosperous.
Yep.
I mean, what they've managed to accomplish since 1948 as a nation is truly remarkable. Now, you got to go back. I would ask, what is it they're doing differently, Nico? What are their ideas that they're implementing? And then I would ask their neighbor states, what sort of ideas does the so-called Palestinians, how have their ideas worked out for them in their society? Why isn't no one answering these questions? Isn't that what you should be doing in an American elite institution? You should be looking at that and analyzing that. These people are fucking ignorant. They don't care. And now they're dangerous to their own country. These are rabid revolutionaries. Remember, at the core of all this is a war on property rights and prosperity. This is coming to a theater near you. They're coming after your property at some point. And they're not going to ask permission. Because as Nico said, they're not here to persuade.
Yeah.
That's where this goes.
And I trust me, I get it. I get passionate too. I get passionate, and it's angering. But what do we do? We have to contend with that also. What do we do? So we have a lot of these students. I mean, this is the result. I mean, look, these are the same students that went into college during COVID.
I know.
Play it out.
But they're arresting
do the
them
calendar.
and then releasing them. So there is really no punishment.
All I'm saying is, how does this model continue to flourish moving forward?
Robert De La Rosa says, the more I listen to you all, the more I consider distancing myself from a specific political party. Sad to say, but these two past administrations have left my mind totally confused. LOL. I'm starting to believe it's much more important the idea, the purpose, than the party. And then Ray Rodriguez says, platforms matter. Robert De La Rosa says, yes, sir. And Susie says, but you must pick a party. And there is only one decent choice, not the left, says Susie.
Well, Robert, look, I get what he's
Both those
saying.
things are true.
And yeah, all that is legitimate. But you're led to something because we have a system of a two-party system.
That's right. It's just reality.
So you're led somewhere. And you might not like either side great, but you have to make a decision. I think you have people like Michael Rappaport. You have other people that are traditionally left that are really hated. And whether Bill Maher admits it or not, it's frustrating to hear him talk because he makes such good points, but then pulls back on his repudiation ultimately by his vote of what he's going to vote for, who he's going to vote for. But that's a different topic. If you're gonna be part of the process, which I encourage everyone to be part of the process, even if they disagree with me, is you have to choose something. Yeah. So it's sometimes the choices aren't always bad, and great. It's bad and better if someone thinks like that. And so your ideas are going to lead you somewhere. So for me, what platform supports the ideas that I truly hold dear to my heart, not my preferences. I'm talking about principles that I would live and die for. And that's how I make my decisions of where I go.
Tamara says, yes, Israel and America are just way too prosperous and way too free.
Interesting.
And Nico.
But hold on. Who said that? I'm sorry,
Tamara.
George.
Tamara.
But what does that mean? I just have to push back a little bit
Maybe she's
respectfully.
being sarcastic.
Oh, she's being sarcastic, or
No,
she's being...
maybe that's why they're hated to a certain degree.
Oh, got it.
I think.
But that's
Okay, sorry,
absolutely
George.
that's absolutely true. And I was going to piggyback on the point that you were making, because you always come back and say, this is unbelievably hypocritical, and we always kind of laugh, not really laugh, but because it's kind of sad that it doesn't matter if you accuse them of hypocrisy. So the very people that are bitching about the fact that any kind of prosperity is a sign of exploitation, those people have some nuts to do that. I mean, a lot of these people, if you look at a lot of these students at these elite universities of Harvard and Columbia and Yale, they have unbelievably sort of well-connected upbringings. They come from a lot of money and a lot of possibility. Yeah. If you look at the people who are bitching in elected office, I think about Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, and they've made a living out of bitching about people who are prosperous. I mean, it's the height of hypocrisy. These are people with a ton of assets, a ton of prosperity. So at some point, they seem to exculpate or excuse themselves. Why is that okay? So nobody else can be prosperous but them. And that's where this goes. Yeah. Nico says at the end of the day, you're going to be left with a handful. You're basically going to be left with an oligarchy, a handful of individuals who gets to make the call for everybody else. That's where this goes. And if you think where the solution is worse than the problem, you're going to end up with not with one tyrant, but a handful of tyrants. Yeah. And they'll eventually kill themselves off. You'll end up with one or two. But that's where this goes. They don't think about where this goes because all they care about is destroying the colonizer. Yeah. Destroying the exploiter, class warfare, right? Destroying the oppressor. That's all they think about. They don't do what Nico says, let's play this out. Therefore what? What does this look like when it's all over? When the whole thing burns down, what does this look like? And the reality is this, we learn from history. So our advice is not just perspective, here's what's going to happen, but retrospective. What has happened in the last 100 years? When the whole damn thing burned down, what did that look like? And so when this DEI chief that Blinken hired says, we got to raise it all to the ground, time's up on America. What does it look like on the other side?
Yeah, what are you going to replace it with? That's
Yeah.
the question, Saulo,
Yeah.
Karen. I mean, what are you going to replace it with? Like,
Well, one of the guys that does interviews in colleges, he was talking to one of the kids that complain about America, right? So the kid's complaining about America, it sucks, and this, and that, and the guy just turns to him and says, "The fact that you're saying those ideas in this university you're at makes everything invalid. It's invalid because you're in this an amazing university,
Right.
complaining about
That's
your
right.
university, complaining about your world. He says, this makes everything you're saying invalid.
Why would you? Why would you hire? Why would you hire anybody? Yeah. I mean, you just asked that question about an hour ago. Why would you hire anybody like that into your organization?
But anybody advocating this doesn't play it out. They don't really understand communism. They don't understand socialism.
true. Yes,
They really don't. I mean, they say, "Oh, it's never been applied properly." No, it has been applied properly, and we've seen that
100%,
happen.
yeah.
I mean, because then if nobody can benefit, then what does that mean? I mean, what does that mean? That means the government benefits, and then you rely on the government to make sure that everybody gets their proportion. When the government decides, well, I didn't get, he got more than me. Says who? Says me. Well, I say he didn't. Move along. I mean, see, someone's making a decision. Either in a free market society, in a constitutional republic, the decisions are made by you.
Yeah.
The vast majority of the decisions are made by you. Government is instilled to bring order.
Yeah.
Just bring order. Bring safety and order. That's why I try to break it down real simple. The government initially was instituted, Karen, to bring safety and order and let you flourish.
Yeah.
Or fall.
Yeah.
You have a right to
Yeah,
fall
yeah.
too. Speak your mind. You have a right to be a dumb dick. You have a right to be smart. You have a right to succeed. You have a right to fail. But you don't have a right to live off our earnings. And then we still have some of that with Social Security and all this other stuff that we not Social Security, with programs that help people. I mean, we almost incentivize people not to work, and that's play that out. I mean, just look at what Thomas Sowell argues, and many other people argue about the welfare system. The welfare system is an example of how the black community went from less than 25% didn't have a dad, so more than 75% had a dad in the home, and how the black communities flourished, and now less than 25%. And why? Because that was a requirement to be on welfare, that you couldn't have another,
No
you couldn't have
dad
a
in the
man.
house.
I mean, look, you have to contend with these things. These are facts. You can look at them. You can disagree with them if you want to, but then you're ignoring truth. I mean, and then the effects of these ideas, that was a shitty idea, and it created shitty results, in my opinion, and many other people's opinions. So the people aren't playing things out, and you got to play things out, and I don't let people hang out in sound bites. And now how you engage in these conversations, Sal, will matter. That matters tremendously. Because whether you're going to invite conversation and dialogue, and then what's the result? What happens if we disagree? Now what? Are you going to protest and shut down the school? Are you going to block a highway? I mean, is that the system we want? Because then now, if it's the system you want, the person that's doing it, then what about the conservative Christian, whatever ideology you don't like, goes and does that to you? Remember, doing to others as you want done unto you. It's a biblical principle. I mean, it's an idea. It's a legitimate idea, by the way. Is that okay if it applies to you? Well, no, it's not okay. Well, then it's not a good idea. Because if you're not okay with your idea applying to you, then you're not sincere about your idea.
That's exactly
You're full
right.
of shit.
This is kind of changing the subject, but did you get a chance to see when Trump, I think it was yesterday or the day before, spoke to the reporters before his trial, but behind him were all these like union workers, and they were like cheering and shouting, and I kept on thinking for the last few weeks, what happened to New York? You know, where are the strong people of New York? And I know that they're typically, Democrat, but even Trump is now saying, like, we have a chance here in New York because of
One
these
of the
people
union
here.
leaders said that.
Yes.
He says, for the last 10 years, we've been voting Democrat. He says, but not anymore.
Well, they say it always at the end of the day, they always go back to Democrat. But what's happening in New York, I think, is indicative of what happens when, the communists are taking over, or the students that are protesting at Columbia. I mean, that's all happening in New York. But at the same time, we have Trump standing there with all these guys with hard hats saying, USA.
I just got to say that Trump's move was badass in the sense that the judge tells me, hey, you can't go back to where you were going to campaign. And then he goes, okay, I'll just campaign here in New York.
Yeah, and guess
Like,
what?
he
The
went to the
crowds
store.
are going nuts.
Look, whether people like it or not, it's brilliant. It was a brilliant tactic. I mean, and just look at the optics too. You look at Biden doing what he's doing, and
Going on Howard Stern.
and well, yeah, and then reading it from a teleprompter, and then reading the pause. I mean, it's really bad. And then you have Trump, brilliant move, going to the bodega, going to place there, and then creating the crowds. What he's doing, going to Chick-fil-A, going to these are brilliant moves, and they have great optics. And he's conducting himself appropriately. If you listen, because I'm, you know me, I'm real. I've been critical on President Trump when it's appropriate.
It's the beginning.
But he's been very tempered. Yeah. I mean, he's been very deliberate. He's let people speak for him by their actions, and the pain of everyone experiencing, I think, is speaking for themselves.
A disciplined campaign.
He's been. Look, you have to admit, man, he's been very measured, and I think it might be because he's in court also, and he's fighting different. Look, the guy.
But it gives me hope that
Stamina,
he's learning and he's appropriating lessons
so.
and correcting. I mean, this is a much better campaign than 2020 and better than 2016. This is a phenomenal
Sorry
campaign.
for the quote, but Andrew Tate was making an analysis yesterday on Trump 2 days ago. And he talks about, you see this man in the United States, Trump? He says, that man doesn't want to be happy. He wants to be a good man for his nation. And he'll probably never be happy anymore. He says he'll never have peace. He'll never be calm. He's stressed. He's so stressed, but he wants to be a good man for his nation.
Yeah, they say he's not running for him. He's running for us. And that's basically.
I think you can say a lot of things about Trump, but I think he genuinely loves the country. He's said it on a number of occasions. He's grateful for the country, loves the country, is proud of the country, and feels like the best way to respond to that is to do something for the country in response. And people pick up on that. And I think the majority of people in the country feel that way. Yeah. Unfortunately, Karen, we have these microcosms of anti-Americanism. The problem is this: they don't look at it necessarily in terms of majorities here. They look at it in terms of the levers of power. And at the end of the day, every American requires institutional bureaucratic support. Our institutions have to work for us. I mean, on a course of a given day, you got to go to a grocery store. You may need legal services, right? You got to go to a clinic. Most people go to a job every day. And like I said, there's an employee conduct manual that's written by somebody. There's a culture there. And the culture at these various institutions and bureaucracies, that culture reflects not the people that are standing behind Donald Trump waving yay. That culture reflects an ideology that is distinctly anti-American. And they know that there's a broad, diverse control of those institutions. And it makes them brazen and it emboldens them. How does that change? We keep coming back to the same thing. You got to win elections. You got to get control of the common denominator here, which is the Department of Education. $70 billion budget every single year, about 4,500 employees. Trump has said that, man, he is resolute. He says, I am going to focus like a laser beam on the Department of Education. We need to get under the hood. We have hired not professors, but radical zealots. These are priests, for goodness sakes. They're not professors. Mm-hmm. And so that's the solution. But you got to get back in power. You got to beat them at their own game. And I don't.
Again, I'll say this, and I guess we'll end with this, and Karen. When the pain of staying the same exceeds the pain of changing, we change. I mean, look at El Salvador. I mean, people were afraid to walk out of their house, and then they have their president now that got reelected by over 85% or 80% or whatever. It was a tremendous windfall. And last time I checked, it was over 400 days they had not had a murder in El Salvador. That's insane. That is in El Salvador, look at Argentina with Milei and what he's done for that country. And it seems like he's done some amazing things for that country. And but my point by El Salvador and Argentina is look at the level of pain they got to before they made change. And then people that wouldn't have normally supported their boldness and these ideas that they thought were good at the time, but then in implementation they sucked. Then they said, I was wrong, and I'm going to course correct, and I'm going to put my vote somewhere else. Good for them, by the way, and good for their countries, and good for the people.
That's after decades of poverty and loss. God forbid, right?
Well, that's my point. See, you there it is, George. George got there quick. No, it's okay. No, it's fine. I'm just saying, but I hope it doesn't. I hope we don't get there, and I hope it doesn't be sustained that long. I think we've already been in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
I think the thing that has saved us from being El Salvador and Argentina is the fact that we had such good bones in the sense of our Constitution and the foundation and other things that we had done not everything perfectly, but a lot of good that we have done in setting up our structures societally. But I pray that that's not our path moving forward. I really do. And that's why I really encourage people to be able to talk. Passion is good. Emotion is bad many times. And bring facts, bring data, and try to persuade people. I still want a country where our predominant way is persuasion, not intimidation and violence. Then we don't have a country anymore. So, guys, thanks for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed these conversations. I hope they bless you as much as we enjoy having them. Share this with somebody you think may benefit from it. And we hope you tune in next week.
Next week, you're going to be gone.
I don't know.
Are you going to be gone? Yes.
I don't know.
We
If
are
we
gonna
are,
be
we'll have a
gone.
plan.
Yes.
We'll have a plan.
We'll have
We'll
a
figure it
plan.
out.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out.
We're
But
both
hope you
gonna be
tune.
gone.
Yeah.
We'll hope you tune in next week. God bless you. Bye-bye.